don't. Neither one of them are giving me any social media. I'll always welcome it because the things that will be just stuff about the show that I'll put up randomly. This is really. mm, Welcome to Alignment. My name is Dasha Kelly Hamilton. I'm going to be your host. I am the State Poet Laureate for Wisconsin and the Poet Laureate for the city of Milwaukee. And alignment is our conversation to fall into authentic dialogue, unexpected, with unmet neighbors. The best day ever, right? So alignment is just that. It's one line of poetry that gives us a chance to fall into conversation with two of our state neighbors who may not know each other in any other circumstance. Isn't that the magic of poetry? So this is not a conversation, a literary dialogue about poems, although we are going to use poems as a way to, again, fall in these chats. And I'll share the prompt at the end, the poem at the end where this prompt comes from. And we are looking at this prompt: disturb the listening air. Disturb the listening air. I know I have my thoughts, but we're going to invite our guests to the screen and find out where this line of poetry takes them. And our first guest is hailing all the way from Northwoods. Please welcome Dylan Jennings to the screen. Hello, how are you?
Bonjour, Kinawia. I'm great. How are you doing?
I am wonderful. Please say that again for me. I learned something today. Bonjour.
Bonjour, Kinawia. It means hello, everybody, or it's like a greeting that we use in our Ojibwe language.
Wonderful. Buju Kenolita. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So that gets us into the beginning of who you are. So Dylan, first tell us where you're from and where you are now.
Yeah, so my given name is Bija Keents. That's the traditional or original name that was given to me. And I guess we say our tax identification name is Dylan, right? Dylan Jennings. That's what I file my taxes with. But I come from the great nation and the Bad River community here in northern Wisconsin. We're a tribal nation comprised of somewhere between 8 to 10,000 tribal members, and I live here on our Bad River reservation. So right here on the South Shores of Kichigumi in our language.
Thank you for that. I love that that my tax name, my tax document. So I call it, a reference to our government names. So I guess we're still having that same conversation. And so this is home for you, and this is where born and raised, and so that is your view and your scenery. So tell us a little bit more about you. So what is your story?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. My family, has kind of lived all over the place around the state, and grew up in other communities. In addition to the Bad River community, also grew up near Wausau, Wisconsin. Uh, uh, move back, lived in Madison for a little bit, finished my undergrad degree down there, and then moved here in Bad River after doing that, and been here ever since.
Hmm.
A lifelong learner.
I appreciate that. And we are going to the humors are going to win. So the digital my husband and I refer to them as these digital aliens scooping in, try to gobble up our voices. So we have a connection that's trying to gobble up your voice, but we are going to continue to push through. And I would love to know, had you always intended to return home?
Yeah, I think I always knew that that was something that I do, was to be here closer to my grandmother and all my relatives, and to be in a place where I could provide the things that we provide for our communities, the traditional foods, to help in whatever ways that we need to, for our ceremonies, for our cultural practices. That's I knew that I needed to be near that.
And this is really interesting, and particularly knowing heading out into the world and having that intention of returning home. It doesn't always get communicated or rewarded or celebrated. Sometimes the idea is you're supposed to go off into the world and keep going, and knowing that your world was your intention was to bring the world back to your home world is exciting, especially as a young person. Knowing that, setting out, is that something that you're finding is still continuing with the young people that you work with now? There's so much conversation, we keep bringing up brain drain, and you have a different dynamic to account for, which is culture and community. So, can you talk a little bit about, is that something that's common with your young folks that are in your area? Does that make sense where I'm going, where I'm asking?
Yeah, no, I think in a lot of our tribal communities, there's some our understanding of how we're to obviously try to live our own lives and do what we need to do, but there's also this like inherent, um it's like embedded in our DNA. It tells us that we're needed in some way in our communities to help out in whatever way that is, to use our gifts to help our communities progress and to thrive. And so I always felt like that was something that, um, at least was kind of encoded in my DNA, was to be here, part of our community.
Hmm. One of the ways that we were introduced was through the concept of being a culture keeper. So there are levels to this community commitment. So can you talk a little bit about how you find yourself as a culture keeper?
Yeah, I don't know if I consider myself a keeper of culture. I think
Hmm.
I just call myself a learner, and I culture, and kind of understanding our unique and intricate histories, we have the ability to help our communities heal, from a lot of the traumas and things that we've experienced over time. And so I think that that's been my way of trying to contribute in many respects, is bringing awareness about our language and culture, and trying to push it to a place where we can see it thrive again.
Okay. Okay. Well, tell me a bit about where this line of poetry took you. Disturb the
Yeah,
listening air. What did that make you think of?
I think that's such a beautiful line, and gosh, I just wanted to start writing underneath it. It was like it's a really good conversation starter. But in our community, in this area in particular, we've been having a lot of discussion about historical trauma, and the notion of re-traumatization. And the understanding that the only way to heal is to kind of dive into the roots of where some of this historical oppression, cultural genocide, colonization, and loss of identity comes from. And so, the only true mechanism for, bringing about reform and change is to disturb the listening air, to talk about it, to bring it up, so that it's the way to bring about much needed change, and reconcile what's happened, and for us to move forward in a stronger, more empathetic way. And so
Mm-hmm.
I thought about that, and I thought about our ancestors, and some of the discomfort that they had to endure and also create in order to manifest the changes needed for, our communities to create a healthier environment to live in.
The discomfort that they had to endure and create. So, in this moment, with you saying that, I think about the job I learned about fire jumpers, right? So, to have a task of going to deliberately set a fire to this natural resource, which actually is healthy because it allows that forest and that ecosystem to regenerate itself. So, it comes to mind right now, and you remind us that you are not only suffering, but you are also causing discomfort as a people, as a community, as a person, to find to either evolve or affect change. I really appreciate being reminded of that part, because we can be the change or that discomfort can be, who, depending on who tells a story, is recast as rebellion, or is recast as dissension, or can be cast as making trouble. But we know with the passing of our angel, Mr. Lewis, there's good trouble to be made, and sometimes that's necessary discomfort. So for you to lean into that as this, the prompt for disturb the listening ear is really exciting. Are you finding that spirit in these days at home?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really interesting. You said that too, because I also think about, just how animacy is acknowledged within our languages, right? English doesn't do our languages justice, right? And within our languages, we acknowledge a lot of things as living beings, and even the wind and the air, right, are some form of a spirit, right? That, an elder once told me that, when we remember our ways and we take care of, our teachings, this way of life that we were given will make us strong again. And so, I think about all that as we're talking about, some of the discomforts and things that, our people have endured, and the things that we have to endure too, to kind of make this place better for our future generations, for our babies, our grandchildren, and our grandchildren's grandchildren.
That definitely puts a evolutionary framing on the idea of discomfort. And we, in our society today, we spend a lot of energy not wanting to be uncomfortable. But I am excited about that reminder that that's part of how we got here, and it's definitely part of the discussion and experience that's going to get us to whatever comes next. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. Oh, I want to ask them before I have you slide back into our digital green room. Is there anything that's coming to mind that you want to share? Before you lose it, in terms of a thought or a comment.
I think that, you hit the nail on the head. When people start standing up for something, and even in our indigenous communities, when we start standing up for water, or when we stand up for clean air, we're labeled as radicals, or as protesters, right? When really we're just people that want better for our future, right? Want better for our children. That's all it is. And so, I was always raised that, to understand that, you know, to what it means to truly listen, right? There's a distinct separation between hearing something and listening. And my mom always said, that's why you're born with these big ears, right? You better learn to listen. And I think that if I were to put another line or two underneath, disturb the listening air, I would say get uncomfortable, heal your community.
I love when a poem makes another poem happen. That's again another great day. Thank you for these early comments. I want to have you slide into our digital green room, and we're going to invite our next guest to come share their response on the idea of disturbing the listening air. Fresh from all the way from Milwaukee, we have Miss Kantara Souffrant. Miss Lady, how are you today?
Oh my gosh, I'm so good. It's nice to see you, and it was lovely to hear you and Dylan talk about that line.
All the different places that a couple of never random lines will take us, right?
Yes.
And so I already have the benefit of having seen how you take randomness and turn it into pointed conversation. So I knew that you would be definitely game for being able to share some insight in your story around this idea of a conversation. But before we jump into that, I want the rest of folks to get an idea of how you move and why you're here. So Tell us a little about you. Where are you from and where are you now?
Sure. And I might reference Dylan often because that's just the way my brain works. So I
like it.
You in advance, Dylan. So I'm based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as you mentioned, and I'm currently the inaugural curator of community dialogue at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And it's interesting to be in a position where I get to meet and really get paid for building partnerships with community members, especially Black and Brown audiences, because I think like my migration history actually made that possible. Brooklyn, New York, born, raised a Jersey girl. And my parents are Haitian immigrants and migrants. And so I grew up in a large Haitian community, but on the East Coast, and then just kept moving further out west, whether it's for school or for job opportunities. And so migration and really like connecting to people, like people as capital, and like knowing what I needed to survive. And what I needed was my culture and the different ways that I carried that with me. So I was really reminded of all of that while listening to Dylan.
You realized that you needed your culture to survive and to be able to, we're now on this side of being an adult and having taken some college courses, and we can wax on and write papers about that. But in your personal movement, for that to be something that you could articulate is interesting and really inspired. Maybe not inspired, but it's really interesting. In this moment, I remember having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about needs. She says, she said, I didn't know that I needed sidewalks until I moved to a community that didn't have sidewalks.
Yes.
And so it's one of those things, how often do you follow in a conversation about sidewalks, right? So how would you know that culture was what you needed to survive?
Girl, your friend was on it. And I say girl from a loving place, not as a place like patronizing you.
Yeah.
So I knew that I needed culture when the absence of it like hit me on a physical, emotional, spiritual level. And I think that was 18. I went to school in Ohio, and it was the first time that I wasn't around Haitian folks. So like, I felt like, and I wasn't someone who grew up saying like, oh yeah, I'm Haitian because of the media representations that we're still dealing with now of Haiti and Haitian people. So because of that, and because I didn't necessarily always go around saying like, I need Haitians, I had access to the culture and the food, so the music, the religion, but it wasn't until my Haitian community was gone that I realized how vital they had been to my survival. Like I missed my mom's cooking, like I missed her combing my hair. I missed like hearing my dad talk and the radio in the background. And so then as I evolved and I found like other Black folks and I did connect with Haitians, I also realized for me, the things that keep me grounded and sane and well are my dance, specifically African dance folks, my artists, my folks who are really thinking about how to make our present and our future better for generations to come, which is why I really vibed with what Dylan was saying. And oftentimes that is Black women, because I think we're thinking about past, present, and future always and how we're moving through the world. But yes, but also it's like people who work with spirit and who understand that the ancestors are always with us and who are thinking like 7 generations ahead. So for me, as I also become a parent and a spouse, my people have not only been cultural keepers, but also those who are working for our collective babies and their babies and their babies.
And their babies and their babies. So you have, sounds like you have a pretty incredible tribe that you've placed around yourself to be in that, to maintain that kind of an energy, because especially thinking about past, present, and future, and if you're doing it at the same time, just by itself means that you have leaned into the idea of evolving and of moving energy. Mm-hmm. So tell me a bit about moving energy and disturbing the listening air. Where did this line take you?
That line took me to the very pragmatic place of like writing in an email to my boss, like global majority, instead of BIPOC, because like these small ways and moments where you realize that you have a platform and you have a platform for sharing and shifting like people's ideas. So to disturb the listening air in the small ways of refusing to marginalize people of color and to acknowledge them as the global majority, right? And also the ways in which every day I show up and represent Haiti is another moment that I have the opportunity to reframe what people think they know about my country, or every day that I get to advocate for non-Christian indigenous faith practices, non-Christian or Abrahamic faith practices, every day that I get to advocate for Yoruba Lukumi, Haitian Vodou, indigenous spiritual traditions, knowledge that has been seen as folk or like not worthy or valuable, but actually it is the knowledge that honors the land, maintains the space that we're in, honors the ancestors. Every day I can show up and disturb the listening air in advocacy of and support of them is an opportunity to keep them alive in big and small ways. So that's what I thought about.
And the way that you described realizing that your culture was more than just the milieu that you lived in, and these are things that fed you. I'd imagine then your idea, your reality of disturbing the listening ear is less about, hey, Black women, hey, Haiti, hey, artists, although I'm sure you do that some days too.
Yeah.
Showing up, you know what I mean? And just showing up and being able to be your full authentic self also disturbs the listening air. So being reminded that it isn't always a bullhorn and a sign and an evangelical approach of disturbing that air, but we're always listening. The air is always listening. So I appreciate the idea of your presence, right? And being intent about that is also representation, as well as being vocal and full-throated about the specific discussions you want to be in.
You're actually taking me to another place, and I don't. No, this is good. I told you before, I don't have social media handles for people to follow, but I'm gonna throw in a social media reference. When you're Black, you're never really lonely because there's always a white person like observing you, watching you, like testing out what you're doing. So I was thinking about when you have the physical platform in the arena and can speak to something, but you also made me think about as I watch my 3-year-old daughter, who's a Black girl, I think about the ways in which I really do want to be able to model showing up as my Black, normal, female identified self. Like, like I want to be able to be grumpy if I have a grumpy day. I want to be able to be happy, to be loud, to like check out spaces and to not self-police And you reminded me in that is really central to how I move through the world now, is like, how can I show up as my normal self so that she
Yes.
also has like intrinsic permission to do that, which she does now as a 3-year-old, but I'm also like watching how she's understanding that people are watching her and she needs to adapt for their needs and not her own.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to ask Dylan to join us back on the screen, because at this point we're all, have both of you in this lane of it's home first. So how you're able to, when Dylan first came on, he used his native tongue as a greeting. He has all of his names, the tax name and his birth name. And it's not for us to figure out, hey, can I call you Biz? No, you cannot. The full is this. So Dylan, do you have children?
I do.
So
Yes.
Similarly, I know, so what you're sharing with your children on how they get to also, to Kantara's point, show up and not have to necessarily explain or apologize their reality is disturbing the listening ear too. That good trouble, that good, discomfort.
See, that resonated with me so much, Kantara, when you were talking about your baby, because I've got a 4-year-old, I've got a 2-year-old, and then I've got one coming to be with us in about 3-4 weeks. So he or she will be here soon. So, I think about that every day. How do we better normalize our language, our music, our everything, right? So that our children just, grow up with that being the norm, right? Where we're not in a time period where they need to hide those things, right? And who they are, right? They can be just unapologetic and proud of where they come from and who they are and what they're doing. And so it hit me right here.
Oh my God, you said so many things that hit me right here too. So first of all, when you showed up and you said buzu, is it buzu?
Yeah, boujou. Yep.
Buju. When you said buju, I actually, when we first were meeting in the green room, I was like, oh, he's saying bonjour. Like, cool. Like, so I went into like my French, Haitian Creole mind. And then it made me think about language more explicitly, because you were talking about how it was your native language, but also it made me think about, when I look at my daughter, I don't know if I mourn it, but I think about how Haitian Creole, which was only seen as a national language in the 90s, right? Before that, it was seen as sort of a Creole, like not really French, even though it's the language of 90%, 99% of the people. So I think about how, like, my fear of speaking that language and my want to carry it and pass it down to my daughter is so big a part of like my cultural identity. And the fact that there's some things in English that just don't capture the sentiment and the feeling of like the language that my mom cries in.
Equivalencies oftentimes. Exactly. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, because that's exactly what we deal with too. And I kind of look at the progression of how our languages are kind of coming back in our communities. And my grandparents, my great grandparents went to boarding schools or Catholic schools that were designed to assimilate our communities, right? And so, there's that period of time in our family history where, they're stopping, not speaking their language, but that's just to protect their children, right? To protect their babies. And then, then getting to my generation or my parents' generation, my mom would somewhat speak our language to us, but only when she was hollering at us, right? Like, she's like, going gay, go, like, don't do that, and so I grew up thinking those words are normalized. And, and so now I get to kind of flip the script and start to, bring back some of that in our family and talk to our children in those beautiful languages that are, meant to have soft and beautiful connotations and intricate ways of describing things. So I love that.
Dasha, I'm not ready for you to come back because I had something else
No, I'm just, please do.
Dylan, when you mentioned that your grandparents went to boarding schools, I thought about the discovery of Native people's bones, right? Like people who had gone to boarding schools in Canada, and I'm sure in the US as well. And it made me think about your comments on generational trauma. And as I get older, I think, and maybe this is the past, present, future that we were talking about, Dasha. Like, as I get older and I watch my parents and I also watch my daughter, I realize that there are certain things that they've instilled in me that I want to pass down to her. And there are certain things they've instilled in me that I really want to break and not pass down to her, because they are actually inherited trauma, like from their experiences growing up under dictatorship, their experiences sort of witnessing Haiti through a colonial lens. And so, Dylan, when you were talking about that, that really, it made me think about disturbing the listening air, because I think one of the things that I've not yet fully felt comfortable disturbing still is, how do I talk to my parents and let them know that some of the ways in which they move through the world are really shaped by their traumatic experiences, when like for them, talking about mental health is still such a taboo. And yet for me, mental health is like one of those things that is central to maintaining myself. So it made me think about that.
I love the nodding. Dylan. Yes,
I
yes,
know,
yes.
I'm like,
So I don't even have anything to say to that other than I feel that 100%.
Most excellent. I would want to know, thank you both for being so generous with your comments. And I know that we are all in, we're all these atoms. We all make, if I make one move, then that affects you. That's going to affect Dylan. It's going to affect people we don't even know by name. So if we all are focused on that kind of shift and evolution, we're going to get there. And knowing that you two are disturbing the listening air just with your presence and your works, I know we're definitely going to get there. And with your babies, we're going to be just fine. My daughter's already let me know that it's going to be her generation and their kids that are going to have it all worked out. So just so you know that the solution is on its way. But do either of you have anything that you want to share, that you want to impart with us, a final thought or something coming up before we move on with the rest of our incredible day?
I love your daughter. She like just makes me so excited to like be in the world, and like thank you both for existing.
Okay. Thank you for that. Dylan, any thoughts, any comments or news?
Yeah, that was a really great way to kind of segue into the ending part, because it's that youthful energy and that innocence and that beauty of our babies and our young ones that keeps me going, and I'm sure it keeps a lot of people going, right? That there's better times to come for our families and our communities, and that we can kind of pass off that proverbial stone that we're pushing forward to make this place a better place for our future generations. So it's all about love and how we treat one another. So thank you for that.
And on that, I want to thank you both for being here. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be a part of this initial conversation. Disturb the Listening Air is a line of poetry that we planted. And like any great plant, you don't always know how it's going to grow. And this conversation grew beautifully. I'm going to close and share with you the poem that this line came from. And like a lot of great things, where we're ending is not where we started. They're not even connected. Don't we love art? Absolutely. And your answer is yes. So the poem is from, let me get my page together so I can see it all. Is by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. And the title of her poem is called Slave Mother. And hold on, I just want my computer to cooperate. It's doing the big screen thing. Do you hear that shriek? It rolls wildly on the air as if burdened of a burdened heart breaking in despair. Those hands so sadly clasped, bowed in a feeble head, shuddering from that fragile form, or is that a look of grief or dread? And the sad, imploring eye, the glance was in pain, a stormy agony that was sweeping through the brain. It was a mother, pale with fear. A boy clings to her side, and her cradle vainly tries its trembling form to hide. And he was hers, although she bore him in a mother's pains. He was not hers, although her blood was coursing through his veins. Not hers, for the cruel hands that crudely tear apart the wreath of household love, and it binds her breaking heart. And this has been a joyous light over a pathway of smiles, keeping her a gushing new, her life's desert wild. The slightest word has been a tone, and music round her heart lives a streamlet bent in one. Oh, Father, must they part? Tear him from her circling arms, fast and fond embrace, forever for her sad eyes laid on his morning face. Marvel then these bitter shrieks, disturb the listening air. Slave mother, and her heart is breaking in despair. Thank you for being here for Alignment. Every first Wednesday, we'll take another line of poetry, introduce two new Wisconsin neighbors, and have a fresh conversation. Have a great day, story, line of your poetic life. Until next time.